Kengan Ashura is a fairly mainstream series, and for being a simple fighting manga, it's more of a rabbit hole than you might think. From multiple spin-offs to controversies that extend even beyond the manga itself, the series goes deep. I made a full iceberg video on Kengan if you want to check that out, but one of the things about Kengan that seems to fly under the radar even among manga readers is the existence of Star Strike Rich, an all-new all-female manga by Standardfish that takes place in the same universe as Kengan. There's only 17 chapters out so far, and after catching up to the manga myself, I have to say, I can't believe there isn't more noise about this, so let's talk about it. The story follows 4 individuals: Tenma Nozomi, a retired fighter; Iroi Ichika, a detective that hasn't been doing too well; Mitani Hana, a female Yakuza boss that just inherited her father's chairman position, and oh, her clan is just kind of a bummy ragtag crew; and last but not least, Hango Hina, who is pretty much the main character of the manga, but we'll get into her in a second. Just a heads up, I'm not gonna shy away from the Kengan Ashura comparisons or bringing up Kengan in relation to how I view the overall quality of this manga, because not only does the manga take place in the same universe and include some really blatant references and cameos, I also see a lot of motifs of Kengan that are reused and presented in a different way or tweaked and modified in this manga, so I think it's only right. But you'll still be able to enjoy this review without knowing much about Kengan, so don't worry. From this point forward, this review will contain some moderate spoilers for the manga, so you have been warned. The crew that we mentioned earlier, the trio, the thing that brings them together is that they're all just kind of losers, and they need to figure something out for their future, desperately. They witness a random drunk brawl on their way home, and seeing this, Nozomi came up with a pretty genius 3 AM idea to get all of them out of the trenches, which is in true Kengan fashion to start a fighting promotion. Nozomi is the brains behind the project. Hana has the Yakuza influence to book venues and whatnot, and Ichika has the police connections to get some delinquents to compete, such as the drunks from Alia. And right off the bat, something I noticed is just how fun this manga is. The girls have a great dynamic. It has that wholesome Yakuza 7 kind of adventurous feeling to it. And this could be confirmation bias, but it feels like this is Sandro without the pressure of having to write super S-tier fights or convoluted cryptic worm stories. The story does get into its own conspiracies later on, but it's much smaller in scale and more manageable. The general tone just feels like Sandro letting his creativity fly under a much less serious environment compared to where Kengan Omega is right now. Do you guys recall how fun and distinct early Omega felt? This is very reminiscent of that. Anyways, back to the story. Their first show hosting drunk fighters was a success, but Nozomi seems to have a bigger vision for their project, and she has concerns that this kind of drunk brawling won't maintain people's interest in the long run. They need something that is not a gimmick, someone legit as the face of their promotion. Enter Hango Hina, a very normal looking high school girl who just happens to be a total freak of nature. The Army of God is an ultra-religious, nearly terrorist level cult led by Hina's adoptive father, who is dead now, and the cult is presumed to have kind of fallen apart after his death. But the public safety still closely follows everyone involved with the cult, because prior to their leader's passing, they've been dabbling in some pretty serious chemical weapons. But one day, public safety stopped keeping tabs on them altogether, and according to one of their members, apparently it's Hina that's controlling everything from behind the scenes. She's also gone through some extreme training under her father's guidance and is a total beast in a fighting ring. Word around the block is that the chemical weapons might be in her possession, and that's her leverage against the government, which would also explain why they stopped tracking her all of a sudden. This chemical weapon storyline is kind of the real story of the manga, the worm equivalent of Strike It Rich. But anyways, the three would end up recruiting or rather capturing Hina, who pretty much confirms that the weapons are indeed real. But for the time being, she agreed to join For Korea, the trio's fighting organization, and once again, it was a complete success. Only one issue. Most of the fighters are no match for Hina. She's a complete freak of nature. They need far better opponents. So, they put out a price tag, 5 million yen for whoever wants to step up, and some big fish in the underground scene took the bait. Shina Riko and Shina Riku, two crazy sisters, and Yuzuha Lee, a Chinese martial arts prodigy reminiscent of Liu Dongchen. They hosted a tournament between the 4 competitors, and it was a great tournament with some super fun fights. I'm not going to mention most of the tournament in this review because it's not really relevant to what I want to discuss, but it's really good, so I suggest you read it for yourself. To continue with my review, if you pay attention, a lot of the themes in Strike It Rich are kind of a flip of what we saw in Ashura. In Kengan, it was Tokita Oma, a completely unfamiliar underdog trying to take on the biggest organization. With this manga, it's a big fish in a small pond scenario, with Hina dominating a bottom tier promotion and strong fighters seeking her out, as opposed to the other way around. And whereas Oma and Kazuo had this very emotional bond where they both inspired each other, Hina and Nozomi in comparison seems a lot more toxic, a powder keg that's gonna explode soon. They're only working together because their partnership is mutually beneficial. Hina constantly lashes out at Nozomi purely out of excitement to fight, and because she recognizes Nozomi as one of the stronger people around her. She's also not very cooperative on top of being a genuine sicko and probably a genuine threat with the weapons thing, so it appears that the long-term story is for Nozomi to return to fighting against the loose cannon that is Hina, which is something I also really liked. Developing these serious long-term narratives while simultaneously giving you just hype tournament fights and really fun, colorful character moments guaranteed to fill the Ashura-sized hole in your chest. The series also has some exceptional art. It's the artist that did Sandrovich Dumbbell's manga before Kengan, so it's not Darumian. The action in this series is tremendous. The motion and the intensity are conveyed so well. I sound like a broken record, but even if purely from a visual standpoint, this really does remind me of Ashura in some ways. This manga also does comedy very well. The characters have great dynamics with each other, and the series has a lot of really funny back and forth bantering that highlights their friendship. Something I also noticed is that this manga has some of the best English translations I've ever seen. It's such a weird thing to point out, but the comic translators really did their thing. The dialogues sound like an American TV show as opposed to something that was translated from another language. It just flows very well and helps with the immersion. If I had to name some things I don't like, I have some gripes with Hina as a character. Whether it be seinen or shonen or anything in between, I just don't like these quirky, crazy, unhinged characters. They offer very little in terms of substance, and in many ways, they feel like a plot device that exists only to give you information or make problems happen. They don't really have any real motivations of their own. The only thing about Hina that's interesting to me is her revolution thing. She has a catchphrase that she repeats before and after every fight. Whenever she beats her opponent, she calls it a perfect revolution. It's like a pro wrestling gimmick, but there is this constant unease and the possibility that she might mean it literally, because of the chemical weapons in her possession. So that part is intriguing, but outside of that, I find her to be generally gimmicky and kind of uninteresting. And because these archetypes of characters have to keep up this insane volatile attitude, they rarely have any moments where they express any sort of sincerity or show a dimensional fleshed out personality. The only time Hina expresses some joy is when she fights strong opponents, which is, very substandard for a fighting manga. Of course, she could develop over time, but in the 17 chapters that have come out so far, pretty much everyone runs circles around her in terms of being likable dimensional characters. Even the Shina sisters have become such fun personalities to watch in their relatively short screen time. But yeah, that's the only thing I dislike really. I highly recommend this one if you want to read a really wholesome, tongue-in-cheek, quirky fighting manga with a simple and decent enough linear story to follow. And not to mention the fights are excellent, with the potential to only keep getting better. Granted, they're not as emotional or nail-bitingly tense as Kengan Ashura, at least not yet, but I don't think it's trying to beat that anyways. Is Sandro just having fun and I guess in a way going back to his more comedic roots, as well as trying out something new that I assume isn't as burdensome as something like Kengan Omega. In comparison, Strike It Rich is nowhere near huge or viewed under a microscope as much, and that freedom really comes through. So yeah, give this one a try. So far it's been Edward Takeshi, thanks for watching as always, and peace.